Ryu was an ordinary teenager who met an unfortunate end after being hit by a truck. He was then reincarnated into a world brimming with magic. In this new life, he was gifted with water magic and wished for nothing more than to live a peaceful, quiet life alone. However, without even realizing it, he gradually became the most powerful mage in the world. At the age of 15, Ryu found himself in a strange white void. As he stood there in confusion, a tall blonde man appeared and informed him that he had died. When Ryu recalled being run over by Truck-kun, he asked if the man was God. The man replied that he was more like an angel tasked with sending Ryu into another world. The angel explained that Ryu could live however he wanted in the next world. Ryu, being a laid-back person, requested a slow, peaceful life. The angel had no objection and revealed that about 20% of the people in that world could use magic, and Ryu had an affinity for water magic. Because of his choice to live peacefully, the angel arranged to place him in a safe house in the forest, surrounded by a monster-proof barrier and stocked with 2 months' worth of food. Ryu wakes up in the house in the middle of the forest and immediately heads outside to test out his newfound magic abilities. He then checks out his house that has some frozen meat in a cold room and also an empty bath. There is a knife and 2 beginner-level books on the table that tell him about monsters and plants in the area. After that, he heads outside again and experiments with magic, discovering that he can create water just by imagining it. No need to chant any spells. He wants to take a hot bath, but can only create room temperature water, so he decides to start a fire instead. He goes full caveman mode and tries creating fire by rubbing sticks together, but he does not have the required skill or strength for that. He gives up, but then he gets an idea to use the sunlight to create fire instead. He decides to create a lens using ice, imaging individual water molecules bonding together as heat is stolen from them, and ultimately succeeds in freezing the water. He then carves the ice into a sphere and uses it as a lens to start a fire. Thanks to that, he can enjoy a hot bath at night and realizes that he can create hot water directly if he just applies the principles of modern science to magic. The next day, as he has some dried meat for breakfast, Ryu thinks that he must increase his offensive power because he will need to hunt monsters once he runs out of stored food. He starts by practicing to shoot a water ball at a tree. Even though he hits his target on the first attempt, it doesn't do any damage. He is not discouraged by that and decides to shoot out a high-pressure water jet, believing it will have enough power. However, he can't put enough force into the water jet to reach the tree. Ryu feels like giving up. Then he recalls that the angel told him the key to using magic is his imagination, and he can get better only with regular practice. So Ryu keeps practicing shooting water jets until he can consistently hit the tree. At night, he is able to generate hot water directly. The next day, he tries creating ice crystals out of thin air because he has always dreamed of using the Icicle Lance magic spell. However, shooting an icicle is even harder than shooting water. But Ryu keeps practicing it along with his other water magic variations. Days pass, and he becomes more skilled at using water and ice. One day, he decides to head into the forest to hunt for some food. He explores the beautiful forest and decides to gather some herbs and call it a day. But just then, he notices an angry boar staring at him. Ryu freezes in terror as the boar charges at him, and he barely gets out of its way at the last moment. The boar simply knocks down a tree, and Ryu gathers the courage to fight back. He covers the ground in front of the boar with a sheet of ice, making it slip. As the boar slides towards him really fast, Ryu creates multiple sharp icicles pointing towards it at the end of the runway. The boar hits the icicles at full speed and immediately dies after being turned into Swiss cheese. Ryu can't believe that he won. And at night, he checks his book on monsters to find that boars are the weakest kind of monsters. He then notices that even though the book talks about beginner-level monsters, there are 2 special entries at the end. First one is about dragons, who are powerful enough to burn down entire cities easily, and if one spots them, he should immediately run away. The second page is about demons, beings of unknown origin, and the book just tells everyone to pray that they never run into a demon, because that means instant game over. Ryu realizes that the world is too big, and he needs to get stronger fast. So the next day, he ditches his clothes to go full Tarzan mode and ventures into the forest again. This time, an assassin hawk attacks him, and he barely dodges its first attack. The huge bird then sends invisible wind slashes towards him. Ryu realizes that this monster is way out of his league. He runs away, creating ice blocks behind his back to block the wind slashes, and then shoots water jets at the bird. The assassin hawk dodges everything and then charges towards Ryu at full speed, but he creates an ice wall at the last moment, blocking its attack. The bird loses one of its eyes because of the collision, and it decides to retreat this time, much to Ryu's relief. However, while he was running away from the hawk, Ryu lost his sense of direction. As he tries reaching his house, he suddenly finds a glowing lake with a headless knight standing on the water's surface along with a headless horse. Ryu is stunned to see this, and then the headless knight turns its attention towards him. Luckily, he returns home in one piece and continues exploring the forest after that, fighting stronger monsters and mastering his attack magic. At night, he goes to the lake again, where the headless knight is waiting for him. Ryu could not find anything about headless riders or Dullahans in the book, and he wonders if it is because they are high-level monsters, or if they are not considered monsters at all. However, none of that matters because he is here to spar against it. Ryu attacks the headless knight with a sword made of ice, but he can't manage to land a single strike. He keeps taking hits instead, but blocks them all with an ice shield. He eventually gets exhausted and falls on the ground, but the headless knight doesn't attack him because it is actually training him. As he gets up, the headless knight comes towards him, holding a small crystal knife. The knight coats the knife in water and then freezes it, turning it into a sword of ice. It gives the sword to Ryu, who realizes that the headless knight is asking him to master this technique. Soon after that, Ryu runs into the assassin hawk he fought earlier, but this time it has evolved into a stronger version of itself, but also lost all its rights. The evolved hawk sends wind slashes at Ryu, who creates ice walls to block them instantly. He barely manages to avoid getting hit by the attacks that tear through his shields, because they are much stronger than the last time. Ryu is forced to run away, and he can only block the hawk's attacks. The hawk suddenly speeds towards him, and Ryu somehow stops its attack by piling multiple ice shields in front of him. He tries to hit the hawk with icicles, but that doesn't work out either, and then the hawk uses a sonic attack to immediately cancel his ice shields. Ryu realizes that he is in trouble now, but then the hawk shocks him both figuratively and literally by attacking him with a thunderbolt. The monster swoops towards him to finish things, but Ryu manages to pull out his crystal sword and parry its attack. He can even slash away the invisible wind attack sent by the bird, and when it swoops towards him again, he manages to stab it through the chest. The hawk falls to the ground and Ryu walks towards it, realizing that he just met the monster twice, but they developed a really strong bond. He thanks the hawk for motivating him to grow stronger, and then pulls out the sword to let it bleed to death peacefully. Ryu then begins to head home, but then to his surprise, a dragon comes there. He figures that it is going to be his last day in this world, but surprisingly, the dragon starts talking to him through telepathy. The dragon asks him if he saw a black hawk, and Ryu panics, thinking that he might have killed the dragon's minion. Luckily, the dragon seems pretty chill about it, and even compliments Ryu on his achievement. He then points out that the weapon he is carrying is quite rare, because it is the sword of the Fairy King. Ryu can't believe that, and he decides to learn more about the world from the friendly dragon who introduces himself as Lewin. They talk all day, but in the evening, the dragon gets called home, and he tells Ryu that they might meet again someday. On the other hand, the angel suddenly finds that he missed some details in Ryu's status. Turns out Ryu is the second person in 10,000 years of the angel's career to have a hidden trait, and his hidden trait is called eternal youth. A few weeks later, Ryu starts craving seafood, so he visits the beach. To his shock, he finds a shipwreck there. He quickly spots a man near the ship, and upon checking closely, Ryu realizes the man is no longer alive. Suddenly, he hears a groan, and his eyes light up. It's the first living person he has met since arriving in this world. The man, named Abel, has flashbacks of a giant octopus monster attacking his ship during a storm, which caused him to fall into the ocean. But when he opens his eyes, he finds himself inside Ryu's house. He realizes he somehow made it out alive, and immediately begins searching for others. As he leaves the house, he grows more confused because he has no idea where this place is. Then Ryu approaches him from behind. Abel is shocked because despite being a fairly skilled warrior, he didn't sense Rio coming. He is also surprised by Rio's unusual clothing, but chooses to be polite and not comment on it at first. Abel introduces himself and thanks Rio for saving his life. Rio replies that he could only save him. Everyone else was already dead when he found them. Abel tells him not to worry about those guys. They were smugglers. But before he can say more, his stomach growls loudly. Rio suggests they talk over a meal and leads him inside. Abel quickly brings up the topic of Rio's clothes. Rio explains he has no other clothes and no fabric to make new ones. Abel tells him to just buy some. He immediately stops, thinking Rio must be too poor to afford clothes. But Rio eases his guilt by explaining there's no one else living in the area besides him. Abel asks if Rio hunts for food, and he confirms. Next, he asks if Rio uses the knife for hunting, but Rio shows off his water magic, saying he mostly hunts using magic. Abel is impressed because only half the people in the world can use magic, and he's in the other half that can't. This surprises Rio because the angel told him only 20% of people can use magic. Anyway, Abel asks Rio to take him to the shore because he needs to confirm something. On the way, Abel tells Rio to let him take the front lines if they encounter any danger. Rio says it's not necessary, but Abel insists because he doesn't want to be saved all the time. Rio lets him do as he pleases, and they soon reach the broken ship, where all the bodies have vanished. Abel thinks either the monsters or the sea took them, and thanks Rio for rescuing him, saying otherwise he would have faced the same fate. Abel says he couldn't find what he was looking for, and for now wants to meet up with his friends. But the storm pushed the ship far south, and he has no idea which way to go. Suddenly, he gets an idea and asks Rio if he would like to come with him. Rio is shocked, but Abel explains he could use his help to find his way back, and then he could get Rio a job with better living conditions. Rio thinks about the offer for a while, and finally decides to become Abel's guide back to the city. That evening, he looks at his garden, which he has cultivated with great effort, feeling a bit sad about leaving it all behind. At night, he tells Abel he's going out to say goodbye to someone. Though curious, Abel doesn't pry. Meanwhile, Rio heads to the lake to see the Headless Knight and inform him that he will be leaving the forest for a long time. He thanks the knight for teaching him how to fight, and then takes out his knife, saying he'll fight extra hard tonight. The Headless Knight draws his sword, and Rio charges, pushing him back with relentless strikes. After a long and tough fight, Rio grows exhausted, and the knight returns to the lake. Rio thanks him once more, but the knight remains silent. However, as soon as he reaches the water, the knight turns and summons a magical suit from beneath the surface as a farewell gift. Rio is touched by the gift and thanks the Headless Knight again before heading home. The next morning, Rio and Abel prepare to depart, and Rio feels nostalgic about leaving the place he has spent so much time in. Soon, they encounter a wild boar in the forest. Abel asks to handle it. He dashes toward the boar with his sword drawn and uses a combat skill to turn the poor animal into a donut. Rio is amazed and asks what combat skills are. Abel explains that people who fight with weapons use combat skills. They camp in a hollow tree that night, and the next day resume their journey. They come across some lizard men in a swamp, and Abel decides to change their route to avoid them because they're quite strong. However, Rio senses the lizard men are still following them, and Abel prepares for battle. Rio warns that there are too many, so he will use magic to help fight. Abel doubts Rio can fight without his staff, but is shocked when Rio blasts 4 lizardmen with his icicle lances. After the fight, Abel asks about the spell. Rio says it's just the regular icicle lance, but Abel notes that his wind mage friends can only cast 1 attack at a time.
While Rio is summoned 4 at once, Rio guesses it's a difference in wind versus water. Magic, Abel decides not to overthink it and suggests continuing their journey. Before leaving, Rio creates 2 glasses from ice and fills them with water. Abel notices Rio uses a different incantation this time, but Rio covers it up, saying he must have misheard before. Abel then gives Rio a coin and excitedly says it's the first time he's seen money. Abel is surprised because he thought Rio was poor, but never imagined he was this poor. He tells Rio there are 3 major countries in the Central Plains: the Kingdom of Knightly, the Debussy Empire, and the Handaloo Federation. Rio mocks the name Debussy Empire, and while he keeps ranting, they reach a vast clearing dart suddenly. A rock near them moves on its own, and Abel quickly slashes it in half. Ryo raises a water shield to block stones flying toward them, realizes they've walked into a nest of rock golems. Ryo asks if golems aren't usually more humanoid, but Abel decides to fight before answering. He dashes toward the nearest golem, blasting a hole through it. But the golem quickly repairs itself and attacks Abel. Abel retreats, saying their attacks won't be effective, but Ryo gets an idea. He creates a huge ice cube in the air and drops it on the golems, crushing them. Abel is stunned, having never seen such a spell before. Ryo uses the ice cube a few more times to defeat the rest. They find a special rock golem with a big magic stone, and Abel says it will sell for a lot. Ryo says he'd like to get magic stones from other golems too, but they're buried under ice, and he's either too lazy or too dumb to melt at all. They continue their journey and soon come across a gigantic croc-hippo hybrid. Abel says it's a behemoth, a very rare and powerful monster he's never seen before. Ryo asks if they should hunt it, but Abel says it's impossible. Just then wyverns arrive, and Ryo gets excited to see a monster battle. The wyverns shoot rocks with magic at the behemoth, but it roars, canceling the magic and causing the wyverns to fall. Ryo tells Abel the behemoth probably used a magic cancellation skill. Later, during dinner, Abel asks Ryo more about this skill, having only heard about dungeon traps that can do it. Ryo gets excited hearing about dungeons, and Abel mentions one in the city of Loon where they are headed. Ryo gets mad that Abel didn't tell him earlier and asks if he's hiding anything else. Abel asks if Ryo knows about dwarves and elves, but Ryo asks him to explain. A few days later, they reach a mountain range, and Ryo says they'll find human settlements after crossing it. Abel asks how he's so sure. Ryo wonders if he should tell him about meeting a dragon who told him a lot, but decides to keep it secret, saying it's knowledge beyond human comprehension. Soon they hear a strange sound and prepare to fight. A powerful monster called a griffin approaches from the sky, and both panic. Abel has a panic attack, but Ryo calms the situation by throwing a chunk of meat into the air. Abel copies the act, and the griffin grabs both pieces before flying away. They sigh in relief and agree they wouldn't have lasted long if they'd fought something so strong as they continue. Abel says no human has encountered behemoths or griffins in the past 100 years, and the tall mountains must be blocking their path to settlements. That reminds Ryo that the wyverns who fought the behemoth came from the north, meaning their nest is nearby. He turns out to be right. They soon find wyverns feeding on a monster Ryo wants to fight, but Abel says it takes at least 20 experienced adventurers to face. Ryo says they won't be able to avoid fighting forever and asks if it would be better to pin the wyverns to the ground. Abel agrees, saying he can beat one in close combat. Ryo steps forward, chanting a long fake spell to summon for icicles. To stab the wyvern's wings, Abel uses this chance to kill them, but then two more wyverns arrive. Ryo pins them down with icicles, this time without chanting a spell, and Abel gets suspicious. Anyway, they defeat the wyverns, collect the magic stones, and continue north. Soon they cross the mountain range and arrived at the Green Hills. Abel expressed surprise that they had not only fought wyverns, but also managed to collect a significant number of magic stones. He said the stones would fetch a good price once they reached the Empire. Ryo suddenly grew curious about which country they were heading to. He mentioned that he was fine with any destination except the Debuhe Empire. Abel reassured him that the Debuhe Empire was farther north. Ryo appeared relieved upon hearing that. This confused Abel, prompting him to ask Ryo if he had any issues with the Empire. Ryo clarified that he had no issues with the Empire or its people. He just found the name unbearably cringe and didn't want to be associated with it. Abel found this response quite odd. Suddenly, Ryo spotted a road in the distance. Seeing that it ran east to west, Abel realized that the mountain range they had crossed wasn't ordinary. When Ryo asked what he was thinking about, Abel brushed it off, saying it was nothing. He noted that the road would lead them to a town. Ryo became excited at the thought of sleeping in a bed. Abel recommended that he try out the food in the town. They reached the town by nightfall. While eating dinner at an inn, Abel suggested that Ryo register with the Adventurers Guild. He explained that a guild license would serve as his identity card. He added that with a guild license, Ryo wouldn't have to pay taxes when entering a new city. Abel reminded him that he had just paid a silver coin to cover Ryo's entry fee for the town. Ryo began taunting him, asking if he was really going to keep track of every penny he spent for a friend. Abel was mildly cringed out by this behavior but continued his lecture. He explained that being a member of the Adventurers Guild meant that the guild would buy magic stones and monster materials. He noted that only alchemists could use those materials properly, sparking Ryo's curiosity. Before Ryo could ask further questions, a waitress brought his food. He was stunned to see a plate of curry rice. Ryo tried to process how curry rice could exist in this world. He recalled that even in the Ice Guy anime, the protagonist had to travel the world to create perfect curry. He had kind of been looking forward to doing that himself. The taste of the curry was just as delicious and nostalgic as the one he used to eat in Japan. Ryo quickly finished the plate and ordered more. The next day, Ryo kept rambling about how good the curry was. He said it was yet another interesting thing that Abel had hidden from him. He playfully urged Abel to reveal all the secrets he was hiding. Abel was momentarily taken aback, but Ryo simply wanted to know about dessert shops in the town. Abel nervously walked away, saying that he didn't like sweets. Ryo found his behavior suspicious and was left confused. They resumed their journey and soon reached the town of Loon, surrounded by vast wheat fields. As they approached the town gate, the guard Nimmer recognized Abel. He was shocked to see him, since he had been reported missing months earlier. Abel explained that a lot had happened, but he had managed to return home thanks to Ryo. Nimmer thanked Ryo for saving his friend and eagerly shook his hand before catching up with Abel. Once inside the town, Abel told Ryo that they should head straight to the guild. With Abel there, Ryo could rank up immediately at registration. Abel explained that usually, newbie adventurers were assigned F rank. However, if a B rank or higher adventurer put in a good word, they could be registered as D rank right away. They reached the guild, where everyone was pleasantly surprised to see Abel again. People surrounded him like he was a celebrity. Ryo was glad to see that Abel had so many people who cared about him. He decided to let Abel enjoy his reunion a bit longer and stepped outside to get some fresh air. While walking, Ryo suddenly ran into an elf. He was captivated by her pointy ears and pretty face. The elf girl couldn't take her eyes off him either, noticing his outfit. She recognized that he was wearing the Fairy King's coat. She commented that the Fairy King must really like him to give such a gift. Ryo could not understand what she meant. The elf girl said she was in a hurry but hoped to meet him again someday. Ryo stood there baffled. Just then, Abel came outside to get him and told him to come back in. He introduced Ryo to everyone as the person who had saved his life. Everyone thanked Ryo, and he started enjoying the attention he was receiving. Abel then took him to the front desk and asked the receptionist to register Ryo as a D-rank adventurer on his recommendation. The receptionist was shocked no one from Abel's party had ever recommended anyone before. Abel replied that Ryo was a very special case. The receptionist said that Ryo would still need to show proof of his strength for a rank up. Abel said he wanted to talk directly to the guildmaster about that. The receptionist told them to wait. Soon, the dramatic guildmaster Hugh came running when he heard that Abel had returned. Abel introduced Ryo and said that he wanted him to take the rank-up exam. Hugh replied that Ryo's strength would need to be tested. Abel insisted that Ryo was stronger than him, which the guildmaster found hard to believe. To prove his point, Abel showed Hugh the magic stones they had collected from the wyverns. Hugh lost his mind. He said the amount of magic stones meant they had hunted enough wyverns to destroy an entire country. Abel assured him that there was no need to worry about a monster attack. They had hunted the wyverns south of the Malefic Mountains. Ryo asked if the name of the mountain range was significant. Hugh said that he had never heard of anyone crossing the Malefic Mountains safely. He explained that the mountains were so dangerous that even the highest-ranking adventurers didn't go there. He was stunned that Ryo and Abel were the first people in history to accomplish this feat. He immediately agreed to raise Ryo's rank without a test. Just then, Abel's party burst into the room, visibly emotional. They had thought they would never see him again. The guildmaster let them catch up while he took Ryo outside for registration. Ryo followed, and Abel asked him to wait at the receptionist's desk afterward. He said he wanted to show him a special place. Ryo led Ryo to his office. He explained that Abel's party, the Crimson Sword, was one of the strongest and most popular parties in the guild. Ryo was not surprised. Instead, he wondered if he truly deserved to be a D rank from the start. Hugh said he knew how talented Abel was, but even Abel couldn't defeat a wyvern alone. That made him believe Ryo had played a key role in fighting them, which justified the D rank. Just then, the receptionist came into the office with the equipment needed to register Ryo. Hugh left her to it, saying he had too much paperwork. The receptionist Nina introduced herself and began asking Ryo the standard interview questions. She explained that for the first 300 days after registration, Ryo could stay at the guild lodgings, but afterward, he would need to find other accommodation. She also told him about a course on dungeon exploration offered to new adventurers. Ryo immediately expressed his interest in enrolling. Nina instructed him to come to the meeting hall 2 days later at 9 o'clock in the morning. Ryo was shocked to learn that they even had clocks in this world. Nina then moved on to the actual registration. She asked Ryo to place his hand on a crystal device in front of him. As he did, the crystal scanned his biometrics and uploaded the data onto a metal plate above it. It turned it into his guild card. Nina congratulated Ryo on officially becoming a registered adventurer, and they left the office. Soon after, Abel took Ryo on a tour of the town. He said he wanted to buy Ryo some clothes and a staff as payment for escorting him there. Ryo was glad to receive the clothes but asked about the staff. Abel explained that all magicians needed a staff. Ryo replied that he could use magic just fine without any tools. He added that he also used a sword in melee fights, so a staff wouldn't be helpful to him. Abel was surprised, especially when Ryo revealed that the small knife he carried was actually his sword. Ryo then said he needed something more urgently than clothes or a staff. He needed information about the basics of this world. He soon learned that the hour, day, week, and month in this world matched those of Earth. They even used the metric system. This confirmed to him that someone from Earth must have come to this world long ago. Abel returned from the store after paying for the items Ryo had chosen. He then told Ryo that the main event of the day was still to come. He took Ryo to a large inn where all his friends from the guild had gathered to celebrate his safe return. They partied all night. The next morning, Nina had to bail Ryo out to show him where he would be staying. She took him to a room where 2 newbie adventurers were already staying. The brown-haired one introduced himself as Nils, and the blonde one as I Do. They welcomed Ryo to the room. After Nina left, Nils began talking about how much he liked her. I Do told him to stop dreaming about women outside his league. He then made small talk with Ryo about life at the guild lodgings. Suddenly, Nina returned with another newly registered adventurer who nervously introduced himself as Amon. The 4 boys quickly began to bond. But a few days later, Ryo and Ammon completed their crash course on dungeon exploration for beginners. Their instructor informed them that they would be entering the first level of a dungeon that afternoon. Ammon appeared visibly tense about the upcoming dungeon trip. Ryo advised him to relax, warning that getting worked up now would only tire him out before they even reached the dungeon. The instructor then asked if anyone had questions. Ryo raised his hand and inquired if there was a way to instantly travel to floors they had previously cleared. The instructor was impressed, noting that such a question typically came from experienced adventurers. He explained that some dungeons in the south offered instant travel between checkpoints, but unfortunately, Loon's dungeon lacked that feature. Afterward, the instructor led all the students to the dungeon located at the heart of the city. He explained that the city had been built around the dungeon itself, and every few years the monster population inside would spike, sometimes causing monsters to reach the surface. He assured the newcomers that the dungeon's surrounding walls protected civilians and that a major monster wave wasn't expected anytime soon. They soon reached the first floor of the dungeon, a designated safe zone without monsters. The instructor announced that they were free to explore this level but should stay close to the entrance. Ryo and Ammon teamed up. Not long after, Ryo sensed a monster approaching. He told Ammon to prepare for a strike while he held the creature in place. Nervously, Ammon drew his sword. Moments later, a monster ant appeared, and Ryo immediately identified it as a soldier ant. Recalling the details from a book he had read, he instructed Ammon to strike the monster's neck while he immobilized it using icicle lances. Ryo pinned the monster to the ground, and Ammon successfully cut off its neck, securing his first kill. Ammon was ecstatic about the achievement, and Ryo retrieved the ant's magic stone as a trophy for their first successful hunt. That evening, they had dinner with their roommates who wanted to celebrate their first dungeon trip. The group was impressed that they had managed to defeat a soldier ant. Ammon humbly stated that he had only delivered the finishing blow, giving credit to Ryo for holding the monster down. He expressed his desire to explore the dungeon again the next day, although he admitted feeling uneasy about going alone. Ryo offered to accompany him, explaining that he too wanted to investigate further, especially since they had encountered a monster on the first floor despite the instructor's assurance that it was monster-free. Ito chimed in, mentioning that he had also heard about soldier ants appearing on the first and second floors lately. The boys were puzzled by this development. Just then, Abel arrived and explained that soldier ants could dig their way up, which startled the group. They were in awe at seeing the town's most famous adventurer up close. As usual, Ryo was casual in his conversation with Abel. Abel, in turn, asked the others to look after Ryo, commenting that he lacked common sense. Suddenly, Mills stood up straight and introduced himself to Abel, declaring that he was his idol, and that he aspired to become a famous adventurer like him. Mills asked to shake Abel's hand, and Abel obliged, advising him to work hard but always prioritize survival. Ryo then asked Abel why he was out so late. Abel replied that he had just returned from his latest mission. At that moment, Abel's party arrived, and the girls were visibly upset that he had come there instead of reporting to the guildmaster. Abel claimed he had only been guiding some beginners who needed help, but the stern Lynn ordered Warren to take him away. The large man carried Abel on his back as he screamed like a child. Lynn then began staring at Ryo with jealous eyes. Feeling uncomfortable, Ryo asked what she wanted. The priestess Lihia stepped in, telling Lynn to stop and apologizing to Ryo for the disturbance. As the party walked away, Idu and Nils excitedly fanboyed over them. But Ryo couldn't understand what they found so impressive about what he saw as a bunch of buffoons. Meanwhile, Rhea scolded Lynn for staring at Ryo. Lynn replied that she was just curious since Abel often spoke highly of his magic skills. Rhea admitted to being curious as well. Abel assured them that they would see Ryo's true capabilities soon enough. The next day, Ryo and Ammon returned to the dungeon and encountered monster dogs. Rao restrained the creatures with icicle lances while Ammon, showing his skills as a swordsman, managed to defeat a couple of them. During their break, Ryo commented that Ammon's sword style reminded him of Abel's. Ammon explained that his teacher had been an old man named Kiro, who had studied swordsmanship at a prestigious school in the capital. Ryo speculated that Abel must have trained at the same school and noted that Ammon showed potential to become strong. Ammon was impressed by Ryo's understanding of swordplay despite Ryo being a mage. Ryo explained that he had practiced under a mentor but had ultimately developed his own style. He remarked that Ammon's technique seemed exhausting but was also very safe. All he needed to do was work on his stamina. He added that during their travels, Abel would always practice his sword form first thing in the morning, which showed that even the most talented individuals needed to train diligently. Ammon felt inspired by this and resolved to work harder. Ryo was pleased by his determination. The following day, Ryo visited the library and was surprised by its vast size. That is what she said. In any case, he asked the librarian to direct him to the alchemy section, and she guided him to the beginner's collection. Faced with an overwhelming number of options, Ryo decided to step outside for a break. Suddenly, the sky darkened as a total solar eclipse occurred. Ryo, lacking eye protection like a reckless relative, stared directly at it. Within seconds, he sensed that something was wrong. Everyone around him had vanished, and the atmosphere had shifted drastically. Then, out of nowhere, he detected an incoming attack from behind. He reacted quickly, blocking the powerful fire blast with a wall of ice. As he turned, he saw a demonic woman approaching with swagger like she had stepped out of a video game. She seemed amused to see a human in her domain and decided to have some fun defeating him. Ryo immediately understood that he was facing a demon, and not just any demon, but likely the most powerful being he had encountered in this world. He realized escape wasn't an option in this strange space and resolved to fight back. Summoning dozens of ice shields, he managed to block her massive firestorm. The demon swiftly changed tactics, launching an invisible wind bullet that pierced his defenses. Thankfully, it was stopped by his armor. She was baffled that a human's armor could block her magic, but then noticed that Ryo was wearing the Fairy King's robe. Realizing his strength, she decided to switch to melee combat. Drawing her sword, she advanced, and Ryo responded by summoning his own ice blade. He took a defensive stance as she relentlessly attacked, her speed forcing him to dodge a deadly strike to the face. Seeking a counter, Ryo unleashed hundreds of icicle lances, which the demon dodged effortlessly. She didn't notice the solar eclipse nearing its end as she toyed with him. Ryo observed that she was using wind magic to enhance her speed. When she jumped at him for a finishing blow, he blocked it without much trouble. Though she was fast, her strikes were nothing compared to those of the headless knight who had trained him. The demon was intrigued and demanded to know who he was, curious about the Fairy King's robe and sword. She conjured a fireball, but Ryo instantly canceled it with an icicle lance. Enraged, she decided to end the battle quickly, fearing his potential. She attacked ferociously, but Ryo parried with confidence. Spotting an opening, he knocked her off balance and launched a barrage of icicle lances. She created a wall of fire to defend herself, and as the intensity rose, she added rock walls for protection. Ryo changed tactics, using high-pressure water jets to cut through the barriers and injure her. She was shocked to be wounded, but was fortunate that Ryo couldn't see her through the smoke and was attacking blindly. As he moved in for the kill, she leaped at him, blocking his strike. During their mid-air clash, Ryo noticed her wounds healing rapidly. Distracted, he was slammed into a building. Before she could finish him, boiling water began falling from the sky. She screamed in pain as a drop scalded her and quickly encased herself in a stone sphere to wait out the searing rain. Meanwhile, Ryo descended safely. Suddenly, the demoness unleashed a massive flame explosion, destroying everything nearby. She approached Ryo menacingly, but her sword disintegrated as sunlight touched it, marking the end of the eclipse. She acknowledged that they wouldn't be finishing their fight today. Ryo told her to get the hell out, and she didn't seem offended by his tone. She introduced herself as Leonore and asked for his name. Ryo reluctantly gave it, making it clear he had no interest in learning more about demons. Leonore was surprised that he knew about demons and regretted not killing him when she had the chance. She promised they would fight again, but warned that he might meet another demon before that. She told him not to die, as she intended to finish him herself next time. Ryo was stunned by her words, and as the eclipse ended, everything returned to normal, erasing any sign of the battle. Feeling strange, Ryo decided to buy a few books and rest. First, he went to the bank to withdraw money from the sale of the Wyvern magic stones, then returned to his dorm. He noticed his friends weren't in their room, but as he was leaving, he found them being bullied by some adventurers. Mills and Ado accused the attackers of cowardice, saying they had been ambushed while injured. The leader, Dan, replied that monsters wouldn't show mercy in the dungeon either. Suddenly, Dan's lackeys were knocked out cold as Ryo struck them from behind. He told Dan he was absolutely right, but should listen to his own advice. Ryo asked Dan if he was ready to run now that his friends were down. Dan charged, but Ryo sidestepped and struck him in the gut with his sword hilt, making him vomit his breakfast. Afterward, Ryo healed his friends and told them they needed to work on their stamina so no one could catch them off guard again. But first, he said, they should recover and relax. They visited the public bath, where the priest Ito healed the wound Ryo had received from the wind bullet. Everyone wondered who could have injured someone as strong as Reo, but he chose not to tell them about the demon encounter, at least not yet. For now, he just wanted to unwind. But that is where the story ends for now. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.